Hello, beautiful souls. Thank you so much for clicking on this video. My name is Carolyn, and this channel is all about true crime, mystery, and anything abnormal. I highly recommend subscribing because this channel is definitely a vibe. If you're a returning subscriber, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming back for each and every video. And if you're new here, then welcome. Today's story is about the Menendez brothers, Erik and Lyle Menendez. If you're into true crime, you've probably heard of the Menendez brothers before. Today's story is really asking the question, did Erik and Lyle Menendez have a fair trial, and was justice served? I'm going to go through and give you all the facts of the case. But I'm also going to tell you some things you probably haven't heard before. And at the end, I really want to know, in your opinion, was justice served in this case? There's no question who killed Jose and Kitty Menendez. We know it was their sons, Erik and Lyle. Erik and Lyle were 18 and 21 at the time of the killing, and they ended up being found guilty, and they are serving life in prison without the possibility of parole. But would the outcome have been different if the trial had taken place today? To understand the family, we're going to start with the father, Jose Menendez, who was born May 6, 1944 in Havana, Cuba. Jose grew up in Havana, and he left Cuba shortly after the Cuban Revolution started. So at the age of 16, he immigrated to the United States. Jose attended Southern Illinois University, where he met Mary Louise Anderson. She goes by the name Kitty, so for the rest of the video, I'm just going to refer to her as Kitty. Jose and Kitty got married in 1963. They moved to New York City, and Jose got an accounting degree from Queen's University. The couple's first son, Joseph Lyle Menendez, who would go by his middle name Lyle his whole life, was born January 10th, 1968. After Lyle was born, Kitty Menendez quit her job as a teacher so that she could be a stay-at-home mom, and the family relocated to New Jersey. Erik, the younger son, was born November 27th, 1970. Both brothers attended Princeton Day School. In 1986, Jose moved the family to Beverly Hills, California, because he had got a very, very high-paying job as an executive at a film company. He was very successful in his career, but his co-workers were terrified of him. He was an extremely domineering, explosive man who would berate and humiliate anyone who made the slightest error at work for any reason. And it caused a lot of people to question, what was he like at home? Jose Menendez was extremely abusive to his sons and his wife. This is not just coming from Erik and Lyle saying that they were abused. Anyone who knew Jose Menendez knew that he was abusive to his children and his wife. He was a very mean, hard man. Kitty Menendez was an alcoholic. She had a lot of mental health issues, and she did not treat her children very well. Erik, the younger brother, attended Beverly Hills High School. He was an average student, but he really excelled at tennis. He ranked 44th in the United States of anyone 18 and under. Lyle Menendez, the older brother, attended Princeton University, and he did not do well in school. So Jose Menendez had actually made a very large donation to Princeton to make sure that they accepted Lyle. For Jose, it was completely unacceptable for either of his sons to go to any school other than an Ivy League school. It didn't matter whether they had the grades to get into the school. To Jose Menendez, he had the money and he would pay whatever he had to, because to him, the status of having sons at an Ivy League school was extremely important to him. Both Jose and Kitty were very focused on status. They really wanted people to see them, admire them, probably, I think, almost even be jealous of them. Jose believed that he was better than everyone else, and he wanted everyone to know it. At one point, Lyle was actually suspended from Princeton University for plagiarism. And Jose, his father, was not upset at all that he had plagiarized. He was mad that he got caught. So he was mad that his son wasn't smart enough to cheat and get away with it. The fact that he cheated, that was not a problem in any way. On the evening of August 20th, 1989, Jose and Kitty Menendez were in the den of their Beverly Hills home when Lyle and Erik Menendez walked in carrying shotguns and began shooting. Jose was shot 6 times, with the fatal shot being to the back of his head. Kitty, on the other hand, she had been shot 10 times. And what would be later told by Lyle was that they had shot Kitty, but Kitty was still alive. And she was moaning and trying to kind of move around on the ground. And Lyle left the den, went out to his car, reloaded the shotgun, and came back and shot her again. And at that point, it was fatal. After Erik and Lyle had killed their parents, the two of them sat in the house and waited for the police. They believed that they had just had shotguns going off in the middle of Beverly Hills on a Sunday evening, and they very much believed that the neighbors would call the police and be there shortly. So the boys sat for a while and just waited for the police to arrive. But the police, they didn't show up. And I find this interesting because the prosecution, as I go on later in the story, is trying to convince the jury that the boys planned this and did this in cold blood. And I question if the boys' plan was this cold-hearted killing of their parents, why would they have planned it in a way that they thought they would get caught? To me, if you're going to kill someone, and the prosecution wants people to believe they killed them for money. So if you're going to kill your parents for money, don't you want to get away with it? To me, if you're going to kill someone for money, you want to plan the murder in a way that you're not going to get caught. But the murder was not planned in a way that they would get away with it. They committed the murder and then they sat in the house waiting for police. Now, after a while, the police don't show up. The boys then decide, let's get rid of the murder weapons and let's go and try to build an alibi. Erik and Lyle then returned to the home a few hours later and they called the police and said that they had arrived home and someone had killed their parents. When the police arrived, Lyle told the police that they had arrived home and just found their parents in this condition. He said that him and Erik had gone to a movie and then they had gone to a food festival in Santa Monica and then just arrived home right before they had called 911. Initially, the police did not suspect the brothers at all. They didn't even do gunshot residue tests on the boys. If they would have, the boys would have been covered in it. But the police at this point did not suspect either Erik or Lyle were involved in any way. After the parents had been killed, the boys started spending a lot of money. Lyle bought Rolex watches, he bought a Porsche, He invested in a business. Erik spent a lot of money hiring a tennis coach. And this very much is a huge point that people bring up as to that this was a planned, cold-hearted killing for money. The thing that was interesting was all of the extended family were not alarmed by this spending at all. They said this was normal spending for the boys. Jose was a very rich man, and the boys spent a lot of money. They had a lot of very expensive things. So the family states that the spending before the killing and after the killing were no different. But if you just killed your parents, you think going out on a shopping spree probably wouldn't be your top priority. And the boys ended up spending in the first 7 months, so they weren't arrested for 7 months, they spent over $700,000. The boys moved out of the Beverly Hills home where the murder had taken place, and they lived in adjoining condos in Marina Del Rey. They dined at expensive restaurants, and they took overseas trips. They went to London. They also went on trips to the Caribbean. But this was the same lifestyle that they lived before their parents had died. So in the early stages of the investigation, the police are trying to figure out, obviously, who had murdered Jose and Kitty. But it was very difficult because everyone hated Jose. Everyone they would talk to had a lot of contempt, and everyone they would talk to would tell them it could have been anyone. There were so many people that could have had a motive to kill Jose. He also had mob ties. So for a little while, the police were really investigating whether the mob could have been involved. But the murder was nothing like a mob hit. First, if the mob was going to kill Jose, it's very unlikely that the mob would have killed Kitty as well. And the mob definitely would not have been this messy. Normally, a mob hit is done where they're killing one intended target and they want to do it as quietly and as cleanly as they can to get out of there. So it really didn't make sense that it could have been the mob. And all this time, the police never suspected the boys until a friend of Erik's contacted the police and told them that Erik had confessed that him and Lyle were the ones who had killed their parents. The police put a wire on Erik's friend and tried to get his friend to meet up with Erik and get Erik to confess on tape. But when the friend asked Erik whether he had killed his parents, Erik denied everything. So that was kind of a dead end for them. Erik would later describe at this time the guilt was consuming him, and he ended up confessing to his therapist. Now, his therapist is going to end up playing a big part of this story. The way the therapy was set up was a little bit strange, I would say. It makes sense why Jose did this. But Erik was 18 years old, so legally he was an adult. But for him to go to a therapist, Jose had Erik sign something with the therapist that the therapist could disclose anything that Erik told the therapist to Jose. So anything Erik is going to disclose to this therapist can be told to Jose. Obviously, at this point in the story, Jose's already passed away, so that doesn't count. But there'll be questions later as to why he didn't disclose his abuse to his therapist. And he clearly didn't disclose his abuse to his therapist because his father had a right to know everything that was said. So if your abuser has access to what you're telling your therapist, you're not going to be telling your therapist about the abuse that you're suffering. Erik confessed to his therapist that him and Lyle had killed their parents. Erik then told Lyle that he had told his therapist, and Lyle was not happy about this. So then Lyle and Erik together go to the therapist, and Lyle Menendez threatens the therapist and says that he will kill him if the therapist tells anyone about what Erik has told him. Once Lyle had threatened the therapist, that broke doctor-patient privilege. So what the doctor ended up doing was he said to the two boys, okay, I want to record your confession. I'm going to keep it locked in a safe, and I'm not going to tell anyone. But if I end up being killed, somebody's going to find this tape. So it was almost like an insurance for the therapist that the boys would not try to kill him, which this whole thing just sounds so shady. This is what happened. It sounds wild, and I don't know what kind of therapist this is, but that's what happened. But the therapist had a mistress, and he told the mistress about everything. So then months later, when the mistress and the therapist broke up, the mistress went to the police, told the police everything, and told them there was a confession tape in the therapist's safe in his office. On March 8th, 1990, Lyle Menendez was arrested, and 3 days later, Erik Menendez turned himself in because he had been in Israel for a tennis tournament at the time when Lyle was arrested. The Menendez case quickly became a national sensation because the entire trial was broadcast on court TV. The Menendez Brothers trial took place not long after O.J. Simpson's trial, where he had been found not guilty. And one thing that's actually really interesting, it's just a weird fact, but Jose Menendez used to be an executive at Hertz Rental Car. It's like a rental car company. And O.J. Simpson had done a commercial for Hertz Rental Car. So O.J. Simpson had actually had dinner with the Menendez family, and he had met both boys. So Erik and Lyle Menendez had met O.J. Simpson. It doesn't really have anything to do with the story. I just found that kind of interesting when I was doing research. I'm like, that's very strange, because the Menendez trial happened just after the O.J. Simpson trial, and they were both so sensationalized. I just thought, wow, isn't that interesting that they actually knew each other? I mean, they didn't know each other well, but they had dinner together. The boys went into this admitting that they had been the ones who had killed their parents. Their defense for why they had killed their parents was the lifetime of abuse that they had suffered at the hands of their father, and abuse that was kind of condoned by their mother. Both boys stated that they feared for their lives, and that is why they had killed their parents. So both boys, their whole lives, had been physically and emotionally, mentally abused by their father. But the focus really was on the sexual portion. And Lyle, the older brother, he had been abused for a few years by his father, but his father had stopped SAing him when he was 8 years old. And Lyle believed that the abuse towards Erik of a sexual nature had stopped at the same time. What Lyle didn't know until a few days before the murder was the SA of Erik never stopped. It continued right up until the murder. In the summer of 1976, Lyle had told a cousin that he was being SA'd by his father. The cousin then went on to tell Kitty, and Kitty told the cousin that Lyle was lying and that none of it was true. And the cousin never heard anything about any sexual things happening after that confession, because the cousin actually testified at the trial that he had been told as a child that this had been going on. To me, and this is just my opinion, the fact that Lyle told a cousin about the abuse and Jose found out about it is, to me, I think probably what stopped the abuse. I think to Jose, Erik was a much better victim because Erik was very much timid and probably easier to manipulate and to keep quiet about what was going on. But that's just my personal opinion, just giving that little bit there. There was another cousin who also testified at the trial that Erik had confessed that he was being SA'd too, but this cousin didn't tell anyone about it. So Jose never found out that Erik had confessed this abuse to the cousin, and Erik confessed it to the cousin, and neither of them ever spoke about it again until the trial. There were also photos presented at the trial. Basically, Jose had CP of his own sons. So this is the main reason I believe that the trial would have had a much different outcome if it was tried today, because the prosecutor stated in the trial that it was physically impossible for a man to be R-worded. There was so much ignorance about essaying and R-wording at the time when this trial was going on, especially against men. It was a common belief that men could not be R-worded. And the prosecutor, who, she is a very educated woman. She has gone through law school, she's passed the bar exam, and she's a prosecutor. So she is a very educated woman. But I'm going to read to you what she said in court, because your jaw, it might hit the floor, just to warn you. But she said, and I'm going to quote exactly what she said, "Men could not be R-worded because they lack the necessary equipment to be R-worded." So what she is saying is that because men don't have a vagina, R-wording is impossible. I was speechless. I was speechless when I read that. And that was just spoken very casually to the jury in a trial. And my belief is not necessarily that the boys shouldn't have gone to prison. I don't know why I keep calling them boys. They were 18 and 21 at the time of this, so they were young men when this crime was committed. But I don't necessarily believe that they shouldn't have gone to prison. I just very firmly believe they didn't receive a fair trial. There is no way that anyone could convince me that they had a fair trial. So they had two trials. The first trial, it was Erik and Lyle, and they each had a defense. Like the trial happened together, but they had two separate juries. So Lyle had his own lawyer and his own jury, and Erik had his own lawyers and his own jury, but the whole trial happened together. And it resulted in a mistrial. And when the jury was interviewed afterwards to find out, why did you vote the way that you did, there were two men on the jury who said, well, I voted them guilty because it's impossible for a father to do that to their son. And then they were asked, they kind of asked them a little bit more. Do you mean you think it was impossible that Jose did this to Lyle and Erik? And they said no. They very firmly believed that it was impossible for any father to do that to their own son. And obviously, looking back today, we know how insane of a thought that would be for someone to have. But at the time, that was very much believed. It was a very common belief for people to believe that men could not be R-worded. It was considered impossible, which I don't know if people don't know basic human anatomy or I don't know what, but there just was a lot of ignorance around this. So the first trial is a mistrial. At the second trial, the judge in the second trial, but the judge from the first and second trial was the same judge. This judge decided for the second trial that basically the boys' defense was battered women syndrome, and the boys couldn't use that defense because they weren't women. I know. If you're pulling your hair out right now, trust me, I get it. Okay, I'm getting really worked up about this because it's so insane to me. But this, like, you have a judge. A judge is a pretty educated person. And he was like, well, it couldn't have been abuse because he was a boy and it wasn't a girl. So if these had been sisters that had this happen to them, they could have used the defense of abuse, but because they're male, they can't claim abuse. So to me, there's no way that that can be considered a fair trial, in my opinion. To me, there's no way that you can say that they had a fair trial. I don't think that they should have been let go and not served any prison time. But 100%, I can't see anyone making an argument that they had a fair trial. I can't, in my mind, wrap my head around how anyone could think that that was a fair trial. But they've exhausted all of their appeals. So the odds of these, men ever getting out of prison is highly unlikely. But I don't know. So in the first trial, both Erik and Lyle testified, and I highly recommend going on YouTube to Court TV because you can watch their testimony. And to me, it is very believable. Some people, they don't believe it. Some people watch them testify and think that they are making everything up. But I definitely recommend watching them testify and watching what they have to say. So when Erik testifies, and this is everything I'm telling you is from the first trial, because the boys, they weren't allowed a defense in the second trial. So there's not a lot to talk about. But in the first trial, how Erik explained how this murder came to happen was, so not long before the parents were killed, Erik confessed to Lyle that he was still being essayed by their father. And Lyle obviously was furious and confused and angry and just probably going through a million emotions because he had believed at 8 when his abuse stopped, it had stopped for for Erik as well. So both boys said that there were several confrontations between the parents and the two boys, because once Lyle knew that Erik was still being abused, he confronted his mother and father about it. And Lyle and Erik say that when they confronted Jose and Kitty about the abuse, Jose told them that he would kill both of them if they did not keep the abuse a secret. And the last confrontation that took place was the night of the murder. Erik and Lyle say that they had again confronted the parents about the abuse, and both of them were terrified for their lives. Now, I do believe that they did believe their father would kill them, but for you to kill someone, your life has to be in immediate threat. And the confrontation happened in the den, but then both boys left the den, went out to their cars to get the shotguns, came back in the room, and just started firing. So their life was not in immediate danger. They could have gotten in the car and driven away. Just before the murder had taken place, Kitty was rewriting their will, and they were going to leave the boys out of the will. Now, the boys claimed they were being left out of the will because they were confronting them about the abuse. But either way, the will was being rewritten by Kitty on the home computer. After the murder had happened, the boys had hired a computer technician to come in and erase everything that was on the family computer because they didn't want that second will to be found. It was never notarized, so I don't even know if it would have actually been used, but the fact that they're erasing this will makes them look not good. So as I had mentioned, there was 2 trials. So the first trial was a mistrial. They couldn't come to a decision. The second trial, where the boys were not allowed to present a defense, they were found guilty and they were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. So my question to you is, do you think they got a fair trial? And do you think the outcome would have been different if the trial would have taken place today? We know the trial would have gone differently because they would have been able to present their defense in the second trial, the trial that they were convicted in. But do you think the result that the jury would have come to would have been different? And this is a case I go back and forth on all the time. Usually with cases, I have a pretty clear, firm belief one way or the other what I think. With this case, I go back and forth on it. I 100% believe that the boys were abused. I believe that everything Erik testified to on the stand happened. I believe Lyle was abused as well. Like, I don't doubt the boys were abused, but does that mean they can murder their parents? No. And their lives clearly were not in immediate danger because they went out to the car to get the guns. So my personal opinion is they definitely should have gone to prison. But I just think for a much less amount of time. Because the first trial, they could have been charged with either manslaughter or first-degree murder. The second trial, it was first-degree murder or it was innocent. There was no other option. I believe they should have been convicted of manslaughter and been given, I don't know, 15, 20 years. I don't know. I don't know exactly, because honestly, my mind changes a lot when it comes to this case. But yeah, I really am interested to hear what you guys think and what you think their sentence should have been, or if you think they should have been innocent. Obviously, once the boys were in jail and then in prison, they were not in the same prison. And then they were moved to the same prison, but kept in separate units. But on April 4th, 2018, Lyle was moved into the same unit as Erik. And both brothers hugged and cried because it was the first time they had seen each other in almost 20 years. So the brothers are now reunited, which once they went to prison, that was really the only thing they wanted. They really didn't want to go the rest of their lives never seeing each other. So I'm happy that they're together now, but I also think at this point, they've served enough time. That's just my personal opinion. I would love to know yours. Let me know in the comment section below your thoughts on this case. So that's the end of today's story. I just want to say a huge thank you to all of you who are subscribed and watching the videos and commenting. Your support means absolutely everything to me. You guys are absolutely amazing. I am enjoying doing this so much and will continue to keep making more videos, and hopefully I'll keep improving. I did go back and watch one of my first videos. It was rough. So I can definitely say I'm improving. So it'll be interesting to see, you know, I've been doing this for 7 months now. It'll be interesting to see what the videos look like in 7 months from now. And if I'm going to look back at these videos and cringe the way I look at my first videos. If you'd like to support the channel, please stick around and watch another video, and I will see you in the next one.